You are listening to We Are the Compassionate Revolution. I'm your podcast host, therapist, author, boundaries guide, Molly Moon. If you are a compassionate person and you want to know your worth, set better boundaries, live from your truth, and operate in your fullness, then I am so glad you've joined us. You ready? Let's get started. So we talked in the last episode about how dominant culture, in places where individualism is extreme, can't not create an environment where the symptoms of codependency are highly likely to develop in folks who are compassionate of heart, which for most of my listeners, we are. And most of my listeners live either in what would be considered Western culture or in a place that has been influenced by it. And this is incredibly relevant because many of us are a living example of what happens to compassionate people in this type of system. And yet we've been taught that codependency or any codependent traits that you may have, that they are all your fault, that it's a pathology, that it's a personal problem, that something's wrong with you for being this way, you should get yourself fixed. But what I'm wanting to show you here is that codependency is not your fault. Also, you are not alone in your experiencing of it. And also, and this is important too, that it's not going to go away unless we take action to change. And baby, we can. But if you didn't listen to last week's episode, Codependency is Not Your Fault, I recommend doing that first before this one because this episode is a continuation of that one and I'm going to jump right in. And just a little warning here, if you happen to have young ears listening, I'm going to talk about some heavy stuff today, here and there, and that includes, and I will give you a warning when we get there, but that includes a bit of a graphic moment that is not suitable for young hearts. So please use discretion when you listen today. Thank you for that. And with that, I am glad you're here. So I want to talk about the beloved saying, in my country anyways, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I want to show you what it has to do with codependency, and we'll go from there. So our dominant, highly individualistic culture loves the idea of telling you you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That statement embodies the American spirit of self-sufficiency, or so we're told. But you want to know where the statement actually comes from? There was a physics school book in the late 1800s that asked students, kind of like a math word problem, that asked students in the textbook the question, why cannot a man lift himself by pulling up on his bootstraps? And the textbook asked the students to answer this question because the point is, you can't. You can't lift yourself off of the ground and float in the air by gripping the strap on the back of your boots. Boots were commonly worn in those days, or on the sides of the boots. And if it's helpful for you, you can imagine gripping the sides of a pair of tennis shoes, maybe if you like. And if you pull the sides of those shoes with all of your might, will it lift you into the air off of the ground? And why not? Because you're working really hard and you're pulling, you're applying force in order to create motion. But the answer, and we just know this, there's a greater force holding us down. We call it gravity. So yes, the force of your pulling up is real. You are working hard, but it's not going to be an effective means of reaching your goal because it's not working with the laws of physics. And the analogy at the time when it was used, it was like a sarcastic statement. It was pointing out the absurdity of thinking that way. Isn't that funny? The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, is sarcasm. which is so ironic then that statement became socially accepted as a slogan for what is considered to be goodness and rightness in this cultural environment of extreme individualism, as in the irony has been lost. The irony that bootstrapping is a myth, but that's not how we're sold it. And this probably goes without saying, but let me just say it. I am not opposed at all to taking responsibility for your own contributions to an outcome. Hard work is great. Taking responsibility for your actions is great. Being able to be independent is great. We compassionate folks tend to be a hardworking people. Compassionate people tend to have a strong sense of responsibility. We're not scared of hard work, especially when it's meaningful. There's nothing being said today that is against any of those things. It's the unboundaried use of those things that I want to be talking about today. And again, you can refer back to the previous episode if you didn't listen. But back to the slogan, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And what in the world does that have to do with codependency, you may ask? We're going to talk about that because as compassionate people, we come into this world so beautifully wired to be part of a people, to function with strength and love in a group. Think about our compassion. Where does it naturally go? Towards others. Because we see the others. We see the collective. We care about things beyond just our own selves. And think back. You might have a memory come up here. When did you realize that others exist? And that you couldn't help but care? And this includes animals and plants, not just people. I had the funniest memory come up when I asked myself this, because I remember sobbing and sobbing over an egg my goose laid that was malformed, and so it didn't get to hatch. I had these geese that I just loved, and they loved me. And when I found this egg, I remember it was down by the lake. I found this egg, and I was so crushed. And I ran into the house to show my parents, and they didn't know what was going on, and they're like, oh, hey, let's make an omelet. Because they'd both grown up where your food comes from what you catch in many ways. So they didn't realize that was the worst thing to say to me at the moment. And what strikes me odd about this memory is that I'd seen plenty of hard things, but it was like at that moment, my brain was just coming into the reality of what that meant. And suddenly the world became very overwhelming. This baby goose in my hand was so precious, and I knew it. And I mourned for this life that wouldn't be. I remember tearing out of the house and finding a place to bury it. And I actually remember the exact tree to this day. And I lived in the woods in Alaska. There were thousands of trees. But it's just such a strong memory to me that I remember the exact tree and sitting there next to it on my knees and just weeping for the way things work. And we're taught to harden our tenderness off. And we kind of have to. As much as we can. I remember learning how to do it after that in the coming years. I told myself I wouldn't ever do that, but I did. Because you can't bear the world almost if you don't. By the way, you never really lose that tenderness. It is in there. Might be covered up, might take you a bit to excavate it again later when you're ready, but it's there waiting for you. We can't not care. And think about yourself. You can't not care, can you? We come into this world with this compassion. And yet for most of us, we're in a dominant culture that tends to be rather anti-compassion. Because extreme individualism runs contrary to compassion for others. This is the culture of pull yourself up by your bootstraps that miss the irony and instead uses that slogan in a worshipful way as a template for what the ideal human should be. Oh my goodness. So we as compassionate people often want to keep the people pleased because we are naturally attuned to the group and we also don't have any sense of our own boundaries. So it's in us to want a harmonious group. And the way you can get a more harmonious group in a highly individualistic culture is to sacrifice your own self so that others might be happier. So we do. We try to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps in the form of unbounded compassion. We are breathing in this highly individualistic air. And how is it not going to infect us too? We're sick with the same thing everyone else has got, but it just shows up in our psychology and our relationships in the form of codependency and people pleasing because of the unique traits of compassion we came in here with. It's a lot like how things work with physical bodies if you think about it. Science tells us, for example, that highly processed foods are really rough on humans when that's our primary diet. But the way that those foods might impact you negatively will depend on what type of body you genetically came with. Some folks are going to be more predisposed to become diabetic, perhaps, whereas others might be more predisposed to heart problems. And still others might be more predisposed to have a higher cancer risk. Nobody asked for any of those things. It's just how it works hereditarily. The highly processed foods aren't ideal for human health, but the way that it may or may not impact your system might look totally different from how it impacts somebody else. And the same thing goes for our psychological symptoms, in that the extremist level of our cultural individualism isn't good for the humans. But the way it shows up in the form of symptoms will still differ depending on how that individual is wired. Somebody who does not come into this world with an innate compassion for others is probably going to go in a narcissistic direction, especially if they're goal-oriented. Because me culture will feed that. Make money, achieve status, get more, no matter what the cost is to others, and you will be rewarded. So of course, that way of humaning is going to grow narcissistic traits. Yet if that same person with low natural empathy was raised in a more compassionate culture, it would be very unlikely that they would become narcissistic because there would be a natural acculturation process that would help them move away from that outcome. But here, narcissism is often rewarded. Are you seeing how this works? I'm not taking away individual responsibility here, but it's really fascinating to see that narcissism is a symptom too when we look at the bigger picture. And when we understand that extreme individualism is toxic to humans, it's not good for us. But we've been told it is, along with other things like if you just make more money and work harder, you'll be happy. But the rates of depression are incredibly high in the United States compared to many other wealthy nations. But going back to the slogan, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we're told that is the way to fix yourself. That's a way to feel better. That's a way to get happy. But the way doesn't work. Again, it was never supposed to be believed as a truth or a moral standard because pulling yourself up by your bootstraps can't be done. So it's no wonder we're so depressed over here or have so much anxiety. Because we're told that our salvation is found in doing something that isn't possible for us to do. And, as you and I know, it's also a really shitty answer to give to somebody who's dealing with problems directly caused by the dysfunction in a system. You can try to pull your bootstraps as hard as you want to as an individual, but a dysfunctional system is still going to chew you up and spit you out. And there are so many examples I could use here, but I'll go macro for a minute. And the first example that came to my mind comes from racial segregation in the United States regarding housing. And this happened legally, from the 1930s to the end of the 1960s. In the United States, white people could get a house for a good bank loan in whatever neighborhood they could afford, and Black people couldn't get that same loan rate. Now, some of you know this because you had parents or grandparents who lived this, but some of you may not have heard about this before. It's called redlining if you want to look it up and learn more. But real quick, here's how it worked. So if you were Black and you got a home loan, you paid more than white people for the same type of home. And also, if you were Black, you weren't allowed to live in whatever neighborhood you wanted. This was legal. This was not just done by private businesses. It was done by government agencies. And it was not just done in the South. It was done all over the United States. New York, LA, Boston, Seattle, Portland, Oregon. If you were Black and buying a house, you did not get to move into the neighborhoods where the good schools were, or the nice grocery stores were, or the nice parks were, not to mention that the white family is paying a 3% loan rate for their house, and a Black family living in the same type of house could be paying a 10% loan rate, while being kept out of the neighborhood that had the best schools, while being kept out of the jobs that pay the most. So the white family has a pretty good chance of paying off their house eventually, and then they can pass it down to the next generation. But the Black family is burdened down with debt, fighting to get an education, fighting to cope with all the stress, having to raise their kids in a neighborhood that doesn't have resources, rarely is able to finally pay off that horrible loan because finances get so maxed out. Plus, their house depreciates because it's in a bad neighborhood. Because guess where all the polluting factories went? And guess where the noisy freeways went? And all the other stuff most folks don't want to live next to? Yeah, the Black communities. Try saying, well, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Now. The body recoils from saying that because it's gross. It's gross to say that. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It feels wrong. It only works on people who are brainwashed into seeing everything through the lens of extreme individualism and not seeing the bigger picture. But if you come into this world with a natural sense of compassion and attunement to others, if you see that, once you become aware of that, in your bones it's wrong, and you can't not care because we're compassionate. So for some of us, it physically hurts to see this kind of thing. And so what's weird is if you're experiencing that same thing yourself, it actually hurts you more to watch the people that you love experiencing that. I always say one of the reasons why compassionate people are the medicine the world needs is because we know that treating our fellow humans in shitty ways is wrong. Our bodies hold the truth of it. It's wrong in the micro, it's wrong in the macro. It's not love. Treating people with dishonor is no kind of answer. And we hold that truth in our bodies. We contain. It's kind of cool to think about it. We literally contain a truth. We embody a truth that needs to be woven into how we do life as humans. It needs to be woven into the macro. Because right now, that's not how the world is built to work. And it's really weird if you think about it, that we humans literally have the power to decide how we're going to do things as a people. We forget that. We have an incredible amount of power. Everything people have done, we've made it up. All the different ways of being, from how we dress to how we speak to our music to the way we design what ends up becoming culture, we made it up. We created it. And there have been many ways that have been so good for humans. There's a lot of different ways to be that are really healthy for us, that help humans thrive. It can look a million different ways. There's a lot of healthy options, but what we're living in right now is not. And there are many lovely things in the mix too, don't get me wrong, but we're focusing here on codependency and where it comes from. And it comes from some really toxic underpinnings. We're stuck in a system where being a human means you have to play a game where the rules are totally rigged, and the game itself is not good for you. And we know instinctively it doesn't feel good. It hurts us to watch other people have to play this game where the rules are totally rigged. Yet we ourselves employ the pull yourself up by your bootstraps ideology to ourselves all the time because guess what? That ideology is woven into codependency. Here are 4 ways that you can see it showing up. Number 1, shame around needs. Because we have this idea from bootstrap ideology that we should be able to figure it out, that we shouldn't even have needs, because we should be self-sufficient and not need anybody. I mean, we know that other people need people, but somehow we shouldn't need people. So asking for help, oh my gosh, getting help, that is also bad. Or setting any limits around what you can and can't do, saying no, all that sort of stuff, feels like you're doing something wrong. That comes from pull yourself up by your bootstraps ideology. Second way it shows up as a symptom in codependency is the idea of self-sacrifice being a virtue. Because we don't have our boundaries, we will take over-functioning to a whole new level. We will abandon ourselves and believe that that is what we have to do to be a good person. Number 3, because we live in a culture that is hyper-individualistic, we will counterbalance that by becoming hyper-responsible. And bootstrap ideology comes in here. So tell me if you've ever thought this. If I just tried harder, if I just did more, I could have saved him, I could have fixed it. It's all my fault. If I would have, it's a problem that involves more than you, but you put 100% of the responsibility for solving the problem on you. That's bootstrap ideology. And the fourth one is burnout or collapse, physical or emotional collapse. Because bootstrapping isn't actually doable, but when we pour out our energy into doing something that can't actually be done, what is that going to lead to? Well, it's going to lead to eventual collapse. It can't not. Now, what I find fascinating is it's the solution to both this problem in our individual lives and this very same problem on a larger scale is found in people like us coming into our true boundaries. Because if we exist in our full power, so exciting. If we know our true boundaries, we are going to do something. We are going to begin moving towards love, capital L love, whether it's, something where we're facing a really toxic relationship and we need to be able to get free of that. Coming into our true boundaries helps us do that. Or if it's, we really want to help change the world through whatever it is we're the most passionate about wanting to do, but we're, scared to do it, coming into our boundaries helps us with that too. It's rejecting how they've told us we're supposed to be and stepping into our truth. And our boundaries are our truth. Our boundaries are the doorway to our power. Because once we find our true power, then we know how to walk in love. And we will not be silent. We will not look the other way. And we will not quietly accept dishonoring our fellow humans as the norm, any more than we'll accept it being okay for ourselves. Which means we are actually incredibly powerful as a people. The more and more of us that wake up, we are a force. Can you imagine this world if all the compassionate people were awake and said, nope, no more. No more. The bullshit's over. Love is the way, and we will not participate in anything less. Can you imagine that level of heart-centered power at critical mass? So the only way this extremely individualistic way of doing life in dominant culture can work is if the compassionate people are effectively defanged. And that happens in primarily 2 big ways. First, and easiest, though it's not easy anymore, the best way to disempower compassionate people is simply keep them in the dark about what's happening. Because if they don't know, they won't care. And if they don't care, then they won't try to stop it. So there's been a lot of energy that's gone into keeping people ignorant about how other people are being harmed. And this has been happening for the entire history of horrible things, in the micro and the macro. Think about an abusive relationship. Why do you think the person committing the abuse tries to make sure that the recipient doesn't tell anyone about what's going on? They want the person getting abused to keep quiet about what's happening. Don't tell anybody, because if they start talking, well, the people who find out are going to start putting pressure on the situation. They're going to either tell the person committing the abuse to stop, or they're going to try to get the person being abused to get away. So the abusive person often works really hard to keep the person receiving the abuse separated. They will try to separate you from your friends and your family because that protects the abuse. It doesn't protect you, but it protects the abuse. Well, the same thing happens in the macro too. If we can keep people ignorant, then we can get away with the thing that we're doing. I just started reading about King Leopold, who was the king of Belgium in the 1800s, and what happened in the Congo. And I still don't know a lot, but oh my gosh. And this is a trigger warning here, by the way. This is going to be graphic in a little bit. So if you do have a little one who's listening, probably best to mute this next part. So like 10 million people in West Africa were wiped out during his reign. Some people say more than that. Some people say 10 million is a low estimate. And plenty more were left disfigured. And there's this picture. You can look it up if you want, but it's a hard one. It's such a hard picture. There's this father sitting there looking at these objects on a porch. Oh, it's going to make me cry. And as you look closer, you can see what he's looking at is a little foot and a little hand of his 5-year-old daughter. And he's just slumped, staring at those sweet little body parts. All because their village didn't produce its rubber quota. And there's nothing he can do, because if he does anything, more bad things happen. He has this dad who cannot do anything. It's such a representative symbol of this horrible, horrible time that was a complete and total reign of terror and genocide. Now, is that taught in the history textbooks in Belgium? And maybe it is now. It wasn't before. And I know I never learned about it in world history in high school or college, or anything actually about what was done to Africa, but that's a whole nother story. And one thing that also caught my attention too is that there was actually a whole international movement that steadily rose up to stop him. And the Congolese people resisted throughout, of course, but they weren't alone. They ended up getting joined by many others. There was a broad human rights outcry to stop this guy. And as more and more people found out what was going on, it grew. If you lived in the Congo, of course you knew. But if you didn't live there, how were you ever to know? And of course, King Leopold, he was good, so there were literal propaganda brochures about how well things were going in the Congo. So nice that Belgium's there helping out. Leopold knew how to market. He presented himself as this benevolent leader, bringing civilization to lands that desperately needed it. Look, we're bringing so many missionaries. Yay! And remember at this time, that's often how colonialism was marketed and justified. What was on the brochures was certainly not what was happening, but how's anyone to know unless you're there? What was so bad that there were people who went for a variety of different reasons. And when they got there and saw what was actually happening, they said, oh, hell no. And then they spoke out. There was investigative reporting. There were public rallies. Eventually, there was diplomatic pressure. This one woman who went as a missionary, actually, Alice Seeley Harris, she was in her 20s. So she saw what was happening and made documenting it her mission so that people would find out. And she had this portable camera, which was a really new thing at the time. And she used it to capture what was happening and then spread the pictures to people who could help. An image of the father that I talked about, this horrible, aching image, that's one of her photographs. Actually, if you know the American author Mark Twain, he wrote a book about Leopold and referenced the camera as being the only thing King Leopold couldn't bribe to stay quiet. There was a global publicity campaign to help spread the word about what Leopold was getting away with. And some actually say that was the first mass human rights campaign, international human rights campaign. And eventually, Leopold did end up getting stopped. Not soon enough, not fast enough. And yes, he did end up getting lots of statues put up for him, But the whole time, The Congolese people were resisting in a million different ways. Whenever possible, they never stopped, despite the absolutely overwhelming odds in this brutal reign of terror. It's actually said that half the population was killed by the end of it all. And there's a lot more that can be said here, but it's an example of this massive historical event that most of us don't even know happened. Why not? Very good question, by the way. Why not? There's a lot of things that have been swept under the rug. So back to the point. The first and foremost tactic of dealing with compassionate people and keeping them away from finding out that they're powerful and using their power is this: keep them ignorant about what is going on. Because they can't not care, and then they will get involved. So either rewrite the story, sanitize it, twist it, or get rid of it altogether if you can. And then whoever wants to go do terrible things can get away with it. They might even get statues. But these days it's getting a little harder to do. Portable cameras were a wild and brand new thing back then that many other people who went through terrible things, happened in times before there were cameras. Nobody would ever know. But in today's world, we literally all carry around portable cameras in our pockets that we can also communicate to each other instantly with, no matter where we're at on the globe. We've all seen videos showing stuff going on right now that's just not okay. And once you see it, no amount of propaganda will make you unsee it. And that means that a lot of people who have been kept ignorant, often through no choice of their own, just because of their context, because that was the point, systematic and systemic ignorance. A lot of people are learning new things and waking up. And by the way, there's no shame in not knowing what you did not know before you had the chance to know it. We don't have room for shaming people in this movement. That's not what we need to be doing with our energy. So if you're just now waking up, good. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. Let's go. But the second thing done to compassionate people is this. And this, if you can't do the first especially, then this second one is the best way to disempower you. And it's incredibly, incredibly, incredibly effective. And that is to keep you ignorant of your true boundaries. And that's actually pretty easy, because the whole entire dysfunctional system works only because everyone is kept from the true boundaries for humans. Hint, our true boundaries are not hyper-individualism. That is not the way. But as long as everyone doesn't know that, it can keep going unimpeded. So one example of how this can look is, it's really easy to remove the threat of compassionate folks by teaching us to turn all of our compassion outward towards others, particularly focused on our closest relationships, while at the same time making sure we feel guilty or wrong if we have any compassion for our own selves. And I just described what it feels like to be in codependency or have codependent traits. You got to keep the people pleased or it's not okay to be you. You got to be completely attuned to everybody else or you're not a good person. You got to fix everyone else's problems or you are not worthy. You got to get it perfect or you're a horrible person, and on and on and on it goes. And now you are effectively stuck on a hamster wheel of trying to keep the people pleased. And if you think about it from an energy perspective, the hamster wheel literally drains your energy. It saps your strength. So you don't have any energy left to even question what's going on. Because you've been taught to feel guilty if you think about yourself. So you really can't question, because that would require you to consider how you're feeling, and you can't do that. You just have to worry about how everyone else is feeling. And you don't have the energy left to do anything more than just make it through to the next day. And that works great, because then the system built on hyper-individualism can keep on running just fine. And there's definitely no threat from compassionate folks, because most of them are running on that hamster wheel and totally disconnected from their power. And when the compassionate person finally burns out or breaks down, the system will tell them it's all their fault. The system will pathologize them. Oh my goodness, you're depressed. Oh, you're not spiritual enough. Oh, you're not trying hard enough. Oh, you're not pulling yourself up by your bootstraps like you should be. Here, let's give you a label and pathologize this. You are a codependent. You're a this, you're a that. The compassionate person is taught to believe the problem is all their fault. And We will never question the actual problem then, because the actual problem is the entire way of doing humaning in this system, of which codependency and people-pleasing are just natural symptoms. There's this little book that I love. It's a cartoon book, actually. It's from the hippies era, and it's called Hope for the Flowers. You might have heard of it. If not, it's by Trina Paulus. And when I was working with my publisher, Brenda, right at the very beginning before my book was officially accepted, Brenda, who is amazing, had to create a pitch for the book. I don't really understand the way all this stuff works, but anyways, it's a thing. So she said, okay, what other books is your book like? Because that's part of how a book is pitched. And she was thinking The Little Prince, which was true in a way. I liked that. Loved that book. But I couldn't think of anything at first. And then I remembered, oh my gosh, Hope for the Flowers. To me, it's the closest thing, even though it's also totally different. But if you haven't read Hope for the Flowers, it is worth getting a print copy of. It is such a statement on what it feels like to be born in dominant culture that worships the wrong things, that tells us that the point of who we are is to win, to climb, to be better, to be more, to be best, to be dominant, to get to the top of the pile no matter who you have to step on to get there, to close off your heart and focus on yourself above all. But we compassionate people, we have this deep inner essence in our being that says, I don't like this. I mean, I guess this is what we have to do and how we have to be, but I don't like it. It doesn't feel right. And yet you can literally feel like something's wrong with you if you think that way. It's so hard to go against the crowd. It is so hard when you are a collectively minded person not to go with the collective. I mean, you will question your own judgment and feel like you are losing your mind because you're going against what everyone else is feeling and doing. And by the way, when you do go against that, you will make some people uncomfortable, which we also hate doing. This is our Achilles heel. That to help the very humans we love, we cannot buy into what we're being told is the right way to human. And what we don't know in the beginning of this process is that we are not losing our minds. Again, you got to read that book, Hope for the Flowers. You'll see what I'm talking about here. We're not losing our minds. We're waking up to the truth. And part of what we're waking up to is, oh, honey, there is a problem, but it's not you. You are experiencing one of the symptoms of this big problem. That's what codependency is. It's one of the ways this big problem shows up. It's a way of warping oneself to try to find a more satisfactory way of doing humaning as a result of this very toxic way of doing humaning. And yet codependency is also toxic. And we know that, as we finally wake up, we're like, oh, this is not the solution to my problem. And I say all that. I want to make it very clear. There's no shame here. Because what is the truth? The truth is we were just doing the best we could with what we knew. We've been separated from our true boundaries, which means we've been cut off from our innate wisdom and truth. A way of understanding codependency, in my opinion, is that it is a good name for a very natural reaction, a very natural response that compassionate people tend to have in a highly individualistic, might makes right, performance-based world that we who live in dominant culture find ourselves in. In short, codependency is not your fault. But it's also not going to go away if you don't do something about it. If you're already on a healing journey, a boundaries journey, whatever journey you're on, stay on it. Don't stop. The programming runs deep. It is very easy to fall into. It's very easy to fall back into. Becoming boundaried, becoming who we are, that is a practice. And we've had years and years and years and years and years of conditioning the other way. So don't think this is something you're just supposed to get overnight. Changing is a process and a practice. And if you're just realizing you need a change, then I am so glad you're here. These themes are addressed in a bit of a different way because it's way more personalized. These themes are addressed inside my mini course, The Boundaries Breakthrough. And there's a lot of art-based activities in there also that can help you go deeper with this. And you don't have to be artistic, don't worry. And right now it is still on offer for free. So grab it if you want it. And at the end of the mini course, you'll be invited to come work with me more closely if you resonate. I've got a really incredible program for people ready to go deep with this. But if that's not you, just skip that last part. I genuinely want to see you get whatever help you need. Because this is about us, all of us. We are waking up and coming into our power as humans in a way that is moving towards critical mass. Whew, it's happening. Oh, so cool. And you're part of it. I want to see you come into your power. You're not alone. And your healing journey is not a solo journey, even if you feel alone right now. Just know, in the bigger picture, you are not alone. You are part of us. We are a people, we are all across the globe, and we carry the medicine the world needs inside of us. We just have to wake up. Wake up from the haze of codependency. Wake up. That's not you. It never was. It's just a symptom. And it happened to so many of us before we woke up. And now you're here. Now you're here. I'm so very glad. Well, I'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for being here with me and hanging out with all these twists and turns. There's so much more I could say. So many more examples I could give. It's hard stuff, but it's also really good stuff. It's time for us to get empowered. So I will see you next time. But between now and then, remember, love is the way. And you deserve that same love you so easily give to everyone else. My compassionate friend, I am so glad you're with us. We are the compassionate revolution. We are the change the world needs, and we're becoming it. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or give this podcast a 5-star review. I'd appreciate it so much. And if you'd like to get practical and work with me more closely on boundaries, you can come visit me at boundaried.com. That's boundaried with a D.com for amazing resources. Because this is how we do it. One action at a time. We are moving into our power. And I'm so proud to be in this movement with you.